Vanakkam, welcome to another episode of Art of Living Shakti Club. So, in the varam, we have yet another special person with a very interesting topic. Our guest is called Archana Raghuram. Archana, she was the executive director and CEO of United Way Chennai till recently. Archana Konda, she's got many awards, prestigious Forbes India Philanthropy Award she's won. She's also got one of the 100 most creative people in business. In the Mari Nariya awards vandirukku. And Archana by education, she's a computer science graduate. She's a rank holder. She's also done her executive management program from an institute in Sweden. So Archana has rich experience. Idella unga corporate life la. But Archana has something different and great to offer us. So Enna, she's going to talk to us about the symbology of Hindu gods, right? So something totally different. So Archana, it will be great if you can tell us, engineering ko Hinduism, symbology of gods, what is the connection? How did you even link up the two?
Okay, thank you so much for the kind introduction, Sangeeta. It's a pleasure to be here with you in the Shakti movement. Art of Living is it's such a phenomenal undertaking. So many people are part of this movement, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. As such, no, we all from childhood we've been visiting temples. My parents also have this regular, every year we used to go to Sholingar, Tirupati, and dad used to go to Triplicane, Parthasarathi Koil every week. So the tradition of visiting temple was very common, like all our homes. But as initially it used to be, I used to be a reluctant visitor to the temple because it involved getting up early in the morning, odd hours. And if you go to Tirupati, it's like you miss out on sleep. It's a really gruesome schedule. But then slowly I got to understand so many things in our tradition, in our culture, and in our scriptures have so many layers of meanings. Like someone explained to me how Dashavatara resembles the theory of evolution so closely. It starts from the fish, aquatic being, then you have an amphibian, Matsya, Kurma, Varaha. So you have the 10 avatars almost follow the same progression as the theory of evolution. Then like small things. As a child, we used to attend this Balavihar. Chinmaya Mission used to conduct classes for children. So we used to listen to stories like this. But if I have to identify one turning point, which made me really interested in this subject, I was inspired to learn more on this about our culture and tradition. It was when I heard the meaning of Chinmudra, the symbology of Chinmudra. So if you see Chinmudra, Dakshinamurti, all the forms of God as Guru, they hold Chinmudra. Dakshinamurti holds...
Art of Living, we have the Chinmudra, we do a Chinmudra pranayam.
Oh, very nice. I should learn it one day. I hope to come and learn from you, Sangeeta. Okay. See, for me, my introduction to Chinmudra was through Dakshinamurti. As children, we were taught Dakshinamurti Stotram because it's good for education. And every Thursday, I used to fast and chant Dakshinamurti Stotram. And then somebody told me the meaning of Chinmudra. Chinmudra. Why Shiva as a teacher carries Chinmudra. It's not just Dakshinamurti, even Hayagriva, which is Vishnu, form of Vishnu as a guru, he holds the Chinmudra. And there is something so special about the symbolism of Chinmudra. Chinmudra just summarizes our Advaita philosophy. The entire philosophy of Advaita is summarized in Chinmudra. So if you take in this hand, thumb represents the God, represents God or Brahman. Because without the thumb, the hand cannot function. It's useless, right? Thumb represents Brahman. And then in your hand, different fingers represents different things. Finger represents ego or ahankara because it keeps pointing to others. It's a troublesome part of our hand. And then you have body, mind, and intellect. Body, mind, and intellect. So the other three fingers represents body, mind, and intellect. And normally what happens, my ahankara, my ego is always associated with these three. I say I am the body. When I say I'm tall or short, I claim I am the body. Or when I'm upset or angry or emotional, like I'm in love, I'm angry, I'm irritated, you associate with the emotional mind. or when you're in your intellectual mode. I analyze, I think, I understand. When you say that, you're associating with your thinking mind. So all the time body is associated with one of these entities. I always claim that I'm one of these entities.
Right.
So as long as I claim this, I will always be limited. Like just like the index finger has a birth and death, has a beginning and end, I will also have a beginning and end, like a straight line.
Right.
But once I know the real nature of who I am really, I am one with that Brahman. Once I dissociate with this body, mind, and intellect and associate with Brahman, then I become complete. Like how a circle has no beginning and end, like that, I will also become beginningless and endless.
Wow.
I become, this is moksha. And that is what, by learning under a guru, you can attain this state of completeness. And this is what this Chinmudra represents.
Correct.
You know?
Yes.
And all my life, I have prayed to Dakshinamurti, and I never realized, I never realized that something as simple as what he holds in his hand has so much meaning, so much depth. Like, for example, you just see how hard this is. If somebody were to ask you to develop an art based on E equal to MC square, all of it are very, very abstract concepts. Energy is equal to mass, the square of light. How difficult it would be to make it into an understandable art form, which exactly translate to that formula. And here they have done that. In our philosophy, we had such creative people who could actually translate something as abstract as moksha into a concrete image. And I found it I found it so phenomenal. And since then, I've wanted to find out more. What do each gods represent? What is the deeper meaning of each of our gods and images that we have? So that's how I got started off with this.
Very nice. So I guess that's why it is important to have a guru as well.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you give us a little more examples? Chinmudra was an excellent example. So anything else, any other examples you would like to put?
Okay, so let me do something very simple. This is something which I learned as a child, So we have Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, and their wives, Saraswati, Lakshmi, and Shakti. So what is the meaning of having these? What is the meaning of this pairing? If you take Brahma is the creator. There is only one God, and based on the three functions, you have these three entities: Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. So Brahma is a creator. And for creating, what is the most important skill that is required? This knowledge, right? So Brahma Shakti, the power of Brahma is Saraswati. His wife is Saraswati, the goddess of learning, treasure house of all knowledge. Then if you take Vishnu, Vishnu's wife is Lakshmi. And to maintain anything, once let's say you bought a house, to maintain it, what is the most important requirement? You need wealth, right? To maintain and run anything, from starting from a country to an organization to a home, the most important require is you need to have money and influence and money. So Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth and prosperity, is the wife of Vishnu. She is his power. Similarly, if you take Shiva, the god of destruction, his wife is Kali. Actually, Parvati is another name of is Kali. And Kali means time. Kala, it's derived from the word time. And time is supposed to be the greatest destroyer, because everything gets destroyed in time.
Right.
So it's a very simple way of representing three important functions. And then there are nuances to each of it. If you see Saraswati will be riding a Hamsa. Hamsa, you know Saraswati?
Yes, swan. Yeah.
But it is not the typical worldly swan. Hamsa is a mythological bird, and it has the ability. What is its greatest ability? If you put milk in front of it, which is mixed in water, it can separate the milk and leave out the water. It will drink only the milk and leave out the water. That is a magical property it has, this bird Hamsa. And that is what knowledge is supposed to do, it seems. In this world which is so mixed up, it's so hard to differentiate what is right and wrong. What knowledge does is gives you the wisdom to separate what is right, take only what is the essence and leave out what is not the essence. So the knowledge should ride on wisdom. That is why the Vahanam of Saraswati is Hamsa.
Excellent. So is it right to say, you take what is required and leave out what unnecessary? Yeah. So
Take out what is the essence and leave out what is not not
right,
not real. That is why
right,
even our sages are called Paramahamsa. You have Ramakrishna
right,
Paramahamsa, no? Because
right,
they're able
right,
to make the ultimate distinction of what is real and what is unreal in this
right.
world. That is why they're called
Beautiful.
Paramahamsa.
Beautiful. I think Art of Living also, we have our logo where there are two swans on either side of the rising sun. So I guess
Yes.
this makes more sense. Yeah. Thank you for that, Archana. Yeah.
Welcome, Sangeeta. So similarly, if you want, I just want to finish this analogy. You see,
Yes.
Lakshmi, one of the criticism Lakshmi receives is she's sitting at Vishnu's feet. She's not equal. Like Saraswati is equal to Brahma and
Right.
Shiva is equal to Parvati. But Lakshmi alone is made to sit subservient to
Oh, yeah.
Vishnu. That's because
Yeah.
Vishnu represents Dharma, the moral code of conduct. And Lakshmi represents prosperity and wealth. Your prosperity and wealth should always be subservient to Dharma.
Wow.
The highest priority should always be the right conduct, doing the right thing. And your desire for wealth and prosperity should never surpass
Oh, I see.
your this thing for Dharma. So that's why Lakshmi is always shown as subservient to Vishnu.
Wow.
Whereas all other gods, they are shown equal. So there is so much, every small thing has been so much thought through and there is so much nuance in it. That's what I find amazing about our culture, Sangeeta.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Archana, it's great that you've taken the efforts to go through this and then share all this knowledge, because I'm sure all of us just take it at face value and we probably assume that Lakshmi is the wife and thereby she's sitting at Vishnu's feet, but there is so much meaning, and like you rightly pointed out, I think these are excellent, really well thought of, and it's up to us to learn and interpret this rightly. Awesome.
That's true.
So, Archana, it will be great if you can also tell us about the temple structure and the rituals. What is the symbology of this? Normally when you see the temples and other things, especially the younger generation, they get so carried away. Like carried away in the sense, they're like first to say, why are there so many rituals, so many things to go through? Can't it be like simple? So, what is it that the message that you would like to tell them?
Okay, see, I want to start. There are many nuances to temples, but I want to talk about the basic, the basic philosophy of temples.
Absolutely.
During the Vedic period, there were no temples. You had yajnas and sacrifices, and later temple is a later addition to Hinduism. But how temple is structured is, again, it communicates everything in our culture, reiterates our philosophy. So if you look at a temple, the way it's structured is, it is like a human body. The external the doors are supposed to represent the various pores in our body, and then when you go to the center, Garbhagraham, it is supposed to represent the heart. The heart of the temple is the Garbhagraham, where the god resides. So if you see in a typical South Indian temple, the Garbhagraham is dark. Especially if you go to Kerala temples and all, I went to Guruvayur and they don't even use electric light because they feel that is not respectful to God. They only use lamps. So it'll be really dark. And what happens? A priest lights the lamp and shows the arati.
Absolutely.
And that's when you get the darshan of the God, right?
Yes.
So this is supposed to represent what is there in our heart. It seems God is right here within us in our heart. But because it's covered with ignorance, covered with, desires and ignorance, we are not able to see the God right in front of us. But when a guru lights a lamp of knowledge, and shows you can see the God right within you. You don't go find him anywhere else, but right within you, you discover God. That is the symbolism of having the Garbhagraha and Guru doing the Aarti there.
Amazing.
Then when you come out of the temple, they give you prasadam, right? See, prasadam also is there is also a very philosophical angle to prasadam. So when you go to a temple, one day you will get chakara pongal, another day you will get vibhuti. But whatever you get, you take it with the same respect and take it, right? You accept it with the same respect. That is how you should act accept everything in your life. So whatever you do, you may do your best, but sometimes you may get good results and sometimes you may not get good results. But just like you accept the prasadam in the temple, you have to accept everything in your life. Prasadam is actually
In
derived
fact,
from the, yeah, tell me.
in Art of Living, we have a knowledge point that talks about acceptance, accepting people's situation as they are. So when you're talking about this, I'm reminded of that. Thanks for telling us this, Archana. Please continue.
Actually, prasadam is derived from the Sanskrit word sidati, which means tranquility. So if you have this attitude in life, accepting whatever comes to you, then it will give you tranquility, I believe. That is why the word for that is prasadam, that which gives you tranquility.
Wow.
If you have this attitude in life, it will give you tranquility.
So, Archana, like one of my favorite gods is Ganesha. Every temple you go, first we pray to Ganesha. So, what is the symbolism behind Ganesha?
Ganesha. See, Ganesha is again a very interesting the image, because Ganesha is universally loved. He's the only god you can find in a Vaishnavite temple. Only Shaivite god you can find in a Vaishnavite temple, because he's so universal and is the remover of obstacles. But what does Ganesha mean? Ganesha or Ganapati, the literal meaning of that word is leader. Gana means a group. Gana means a group. Pati means leader. A leader of a battalion is a Ganapati. A person. It's supposed to mean leader. Ganapati literally means leader, and all the qualities that are required for a good leader is embodied in the form of Ganesha.
Okay.
You look at Ganesha. Ganesha has got big ears.
Big ears.
So big ears means you should listen more. A leader's important quality is he should be a good listener. Then he has a large forehead which represents intelligence, and small eyes which represents concentration. And the most interesting part of Ganesha is his trunk. An elephant's trunk is supposed to have very special qualities. It can pick up a needle, and also it can uproot huge trunks of trees. So that should be the range of a leader's vision, the range of his skills. From the subtle to the gross, he should be able to grasp. And a big tummy represents an ability to digest anything. You as a leader, you also know, Sangeeta, how all the time you are hit on all sides by so many things. So you should have a strong stomach to be able to digest everything that comes your way. And his Vahanam is another very interesting aspect of Ganesha. Ganesha's Vahanam?
Mouse.
A mouse. And mouse, if you see, it's very destructive. It nibbles at everything. So it represents ego. So if the leader's ego is big, that is very destructive for him. Even if he has the best of people, his ego will block him from achieving anything. So a leader's ego should be small. It needs to be there. In order to be confident about your vision, to drive people towards your vision, you need to have a healthy ego. But you should always keep it under check. It should be small. So Ganesha rides on a small ego. And that are all the qualities of a leader.
Thanks a lot for sharing. I mean, my house is filled with Ganeshas. I have more than hundreds of Ganeshas. I love collecting, but I didn't know so much of meaning behind it. So thanks a lot for sharing that. So whenever I look at Ganeshas now, I would know the importance of all these leadership qualities.
I know, Sangeeta. That is why, that's why we pray to Ganesha right in the beginning of anything. Because if you want to achieve anything in life, you need to embody these qualities. So it is an example of personal leadership. Even individually, you want to achieve anything, or you want to drive your organization or your family towards a goal, you need to have all these qualities.
Excellent. So lovely. Beautifully put, Archana. Thanks. Next, I would like to ask you about my other favorite god, Shiva or Nataraja. So what is the symbology behind that? Because like you started saying Shiva with Chin Mudra, and then as Nataraja, he has other forms. So can you please tell us about that?
Sure. Again, another very, like Nataraja is the masterpiece of Indian art. Sangeeta, you can write books about Nataraja. Just like a few-minute conversation about Nataraja does not do him justice. There is symbology, there is science, there is philosophy. Like it is an amazing masterpiece. So let me see if I can do justice to it in a few lines. First, let us talk about symbology, the symbolism of Nataraja. Nataraja was created by the Cholas in the 10th century. The image of Nataraja, which we normally see with that big ring of fire around him and with his feet raised and his hands.
Yes.
Yeah, that's Shiva as Nataraja has many forms. You know, there are many dance poses of Shiva, but this is the very famous image of Shiva as Nataraja. So if you look at it, it represents again. It represents Shiva as a creator and destroyer. Okay, so if you see Shiva as both a creator and destroyer.
I'm curious now because I didn't say she was this.
Yeah, actually, no, if you take Hinduism, it's an amalgamation of a lot of schools of thought, no, Sangeeta. So when in a Shaiva tradition, you don't have a Vishnu and Brahma. Shiva is everything. All gods are Shiva, creator and destroyer. So in a Vaishnavite tradition, Vishnu will be everything. So Chola's Kuladaivam was Nataraja. Right. So here he's represented as both creator and destroyer.
Right.
You see, he has drum in one hand, right? The damaru. And in our philosophy, sound is the first created entity. So a damaru or drum represents creation. He's supposed to be playing the drum to his own dance in an artistic way. He's playing the drum for his own dance. So it's drum. And the other hand, he has fire. And fire symbolizes destruction. So in the image of Nataraja, both the creation and destruction is evenly balanced. That's why both his hands will be evenly balanced between his face. And if you see his feet, no, one leg will be on a demon called Apasmara.
Yes.
Apasmara means literally means epilepsy, but actually it represents chaos and ignorance. So how does creation happen? Shiva suppresses chaos and ignorance and brings forth order. So he's suppressing ignorance, the demon Apasmara. And in our religion, ignorance is also immortal. See how wise our people were. Ignorance also cannot be destroyed. It is immortal. So this Apasmara can never be killed. He can only be suppressed at Shiva's feet. And the other leg will be lifted up, which represents detachment. So if you want to free yourself from the cycle of birth and death, that is what you have to practice detachment. So he lifts one leg up to point the importance of detachment, and his other hand is also pointing towards that leg to reiterate how important detachment or vairagyam, technical term is vairagyam, how important vairagyam is. And this hand is also called Gajahasta Mudra, like we have Chin Mudra. This is Gajahasta Mudra. Again, it has the same symbolism of Ganesha's elephant. It shows how his range of skills, right from the subtle to the gross, everything he's an expert in. Shiva is an expert. And if you see, his hair is flying. So when does your hair fly? When you twirl around in circles, your hair flies, right? So there Shiva is twirling around in circle and his hair is flying out like this. And you know, Shiva's another name is Vyomakesha. Vyoma means space. So one whose hair is space itself. So he's creating, and you can see the unfolding of space as his hair flies out in all directions. And then the most important thing about Nataraja is the dance itself. By projecting the whole creation as a dance, what the artist is implying is the only reality in this world is Shiva. Everything else is just an illusion. It's just different expressions of Shiva's dance, from birth and death of civilizations to birth and death of human beings to coming and going of lot of things. All those are just simple one expression of Shiva's dance. And what is permanent in all this from the beginning to the end is Shiva himself. So that is the symbolism of Nataraja. But then Nataraja doesn't stop there alone. Nataraja has attracted the attention of many Western physicists. There is a big image of Nataraja in CERN. You know of CERN, right? The largest particle physics laboratory in the world in Geneva, CERN. Because he's supposed to represent, like one physicist called Fritjof Capra has written extensively about him, how Shiva's Nataraja resembles the dance of subatomic particles. When you see the particles combine and split in CERN, that particle accelerator, whatever that represents is what Shiva represents. So many people have written about Nataraja, and Nataraja is like also it is many physicists, astronomers also feel Nataraja has been created to document an astronomical event. In the 10th century, there was a Crab supernova when big star exploded near Orion, and it would have looked like a ball of fire surrounding Orion. So that is to document this event. Cholas created this form of Nataraja. That's why you have a ball of fire around Shiva. So there's a lot of, I don't think I'm plugging my YouTube video. I've done a very 2-3 part videos on Nataraja YouTube series. You can please look it up.
Definitely. Sure. That was very interesting. So Archana, next, it'll be great if you can tell us about Ranganatha. He is like always in the Ananta Shayanam position, and there are so many temples also here in Kerala. He's one of the richest gods, it's been said. So what is the symbology of Ranganatha means? If you can take us through that, that will be great.
Yeah, Ranganatha always makes me nostalgic. I told you my dad used to go to Triplicane Parthasarathi temple. So every time I used to visit the temple with him as a child, he used to point to the Ranganatha Swami there. Normally you see that main deity Venkata Krishnan, but on the side there is a Ranganatha. And he used to say that is the original deity of this temple. And Ranganatha means the master of the stage, the one who manages the stage. So this whole universe is his stage, and he's managing and running this entire drama of life, and yet he's so calm. He's lying down peacefully in his bed. And I used to think, definitely to my dad, this is a godly quality, because he's incapable of that kind of calmness. But later I found out that there is a deep significance to the sleeping Ranganatha.
And also management lessons, I think, can be learned from that.
Yes, definitely something all of us have to learn, how to stay calm.
Yeah,
I know. So, but then let me also tell you how much philosophical significance is there to Ranganatha in Ananta Shayanam. See, everything in our religion reiterate the fundamental philosophy of our religion. So what is the philosophy, Advaitic philosophy? It says the whole world is an illusion. So it's Shankaracharya often gives the example of a dream. Just like you dream up the whole world, you are in your dream, you are in that world, and you are the one who are dreaming up the whole world, right? Only reality that exists is you. So that's an example often given in Vedanta, or as an example of how this whole world is just an illusion. So the Ranganatha sleeping and dreaming up the universe is how Brahman dreams up this entire universe. Only thing that exists is Ranganatha, and this whole world with all its images is just an illusion, just his projection. He is in everything, and he creates everything and pervades everything. So that is the broader meaning of Ranganatha. But you just see the smaller nuances. If you see, he's sleeping in Adishesha, right? With 1,000 hoods. If you see what is in our religion, we have the cyclic concept of creation, right? Universe gets created and destroyed. So what is the cause of a universe? Why does a new universe get created? All the karmas of all the living beings, right? They are supposed to be the seed because of which a new universe is created, because we have to exhaust all our karmas. So we accumulate new karmas, exhaust a few, again something gets left over. So this is the cause of the new creation, because of which new creation has to take place. So Shiva's bed on which he sleeps is Adishesha, all our pent up karmas, and he's floating on the sea of milk, right? That is supposed to represent purity. So universe in its undifferentiated form is pure, like it's pure. It has no impurities. So in the pure milky ocean, lying on Adishesha, which is all our karmas, Vishnu dreams up the universe for us to exhaust the karma. So that is this thing of Ranganatha.
To some lovely information that you've shared with us, and I'm looking forward to learn more things from you, like how do we approach a temple visit, and then what are some of the rituals, and why we do what we do, and things like that. But that I will reserve it for the live session. And is there anything else you will be talking about in the live session?
Yes, one thing which I want to cover about Sangeeta is all this while I've spoken about how gods represented the various philosophies, our philosophies, and our the fundamentals of our philosophy. But what is more interesting, like equally interesting, is we have like a lot of temples and gods and slokas have science and mathematical concepts encoded within them. So they've used art and poetry and traditions to encode not only our philosophy but also a lot of science and scientific concepts. I would really like to share some examples during the live session.
Wow, I'm already looking forward to it. So viewers, if you have any questions for Archana, please post it below in the comment section, and don't miss the live section, because Archana has a lot of information that will be shared with all of us. So to know about the live session, check out the topic that we are saying. We will let you know when we are going to go live. Have your questions ready, and don't miss it. Get to learn as much as you can. So with that, thank you very much, everybody, for joining in, and stay tuned in for more from Art of Living Shakti. Until later, bye from me, Sangeeta.